Hello and welcome to Council wRap. I'm Wes Decker. I'm joined by Neighborhood Services Manager Paul Fulk. Paul, during the meeting, the work session, your agenda item was vacancy determination. And basically what that came down to, if my interpretation is correct, is letting mayor and council know how vacant properties are determined in the city, first and foremost. Now, beyond that, part of what vacancy determination helps with, again, through my interpretation of what was discussed, would be, blight and crime elimination to some degree, and then ensuring public safety are the things that I heard for the most part. So you talk about the number of properties that are now registered as vacant properties, and I guess the question becomes, when your objective is to come up with a nuisance vacant structure abatement ordinance. So how would that help you beyond what you do now in determining what properties are vacant? And then is there then an arm that goes beyond that potentially with that ordinance?
So with it, when we were asked, how do we determine vacant properties in town? And that was the trigger for the discussion. But as preparing for today's meeting, it was one of those things of looking at, when reviewing it, we identify the properties. That's the concern. But where is the citizens really concerned about it? They don't want always us to be able, well, that property is vacant. We figured it out.
Yeah.
They don't want that.
Right.
They want us to do something about that vacant property and not being a influence for nefarious activities or to deter those types of activities at the property. That's where it really got to the meat of the discussion, is trying to protect the citizens and the neighbors and not deteriorate their property values by having these types of conditions nearby. That's where we kind of landed at for the discussion, and seeing if the council was interested in having further discussions, trying to protect the properties in the neighboring areas so they feel more safe and more comfortable being in their home.
I find this to be a fascinating discussion because in my role for Council wRap, I oftentimes try to put on the hat of the taxpayer and what is important to me in terms of what that agenda item is and what came out of the discussion. So for me, I feel like with this one, I could go a couple of different ways. I could be that resident who contacts the office and says, hey, I'm pretty sure we have a vacant property over here and there might be some activities taking place that would compromise my safety and the neighborhood in general. Secondly, you could also be a resident where you own a property, but you're not there enough based on the criteria that you use to determine whether a property is vacant or not. So I might receive a letter and then I'm going to come back to you and say, well, hold on a second, I am there, which is certainly something that you brought up. Whether that's true or false, that's what you hear from some of these individuals. And then there are the other folks who maybe haven't experienced one of these vacant properties in their neighborhood or anywhere near them. And they're just like, okay, so what does this mean to me? So I'm sort of coming at it from three different angles in a way. And I think one of the things that was touched on, and you even hit on it a little bit here initially, is, these vacant structures may not be obvious. And if they're not obvious, I guess my initial question is, are they really an issue? Because if they're not obvious, even the people who are out looking to do nefarious things wouldn't know that the property is vacant. So how does compiling this list really help you in general in terms of knowing whether a property is quote unquote vacant?
It is interesting, like you said, that you might not know one is, and you might not be paying attention to a property, but there are people that do pay attention and trying to get inside of a structure, sometimes just seeking shelter for themselves, or trying to do other activities that were mentioned here tonight. And it might not look that way, and I've come across those over the past, but they still get broken into. They still are being utilized for some sort of other purpose, and then it turns into more of an issue where they are destroying the inside of the property. It might not still lead to the outside looking like those conditions, but they are being broken into. And I think as anyone that may be listening, or you might know it as well, I mean, I had a vacant property. It was 2 doors down from me. It sat perfectly fine and vacant for a long time. No one even knew it was. And then eventually it got broken into. They got the garage door open and got into the structure. And with this role, I was more comfortable to address those types of issues and not being a citizen that needed to do that. I could handle the things on myself. But, you know, it is concerning when someone sees that. You might not see that garage door open. You're going, oh, so that garage door was open. I didn't realize that before. And then you start seeing, because then the word of mouth gets spread out that, hey, I can get into this property now. And then more and more people start showing up. And then that when it raises an alarm. There might be people inside of properties that you might not be aware of because it might only be one person and you just are unaware, or you just think, oh, well, so-and-so must have rented it out or something along those lines, and you just see someone coming and going from the property. It all varies from case by case.
Well, would you run down the order of events in terms of once you believe that a property is vacant? And certainly you get information from different sources, as you said. I mean, it could be customer service, it could be the fire department, it could be the police department, it can be a number of sources, certainly from those who live in the neighborhood. But what's that order of events to get to a letter being sent to a property owner?
Once we have a property reported to the office, we will visit it to see if the property is occupied or not. And, you know, as anything, you can always walk up to the front door and knock on a door. So that's not violating any protections or anything. So we will go knock on the door, see if anyone's home. If no one responds or anything, and then there's the indicators of it. You might see mail laying around on the property, or you may see that it's not as clean as what an occupied property would be. A lot of times when we do those visits, the neighbor walks out and sees us at the property because they are concerned about it, and they will go, hey, and they'll say, hey, you know, no one lives there, or sometimes we even do just talk to a neighbor if we see them on the front porch. Have you seen anyone going out here? Nah, it's been vacant for years, and then we just get that answer to that question, and a lot of times it's talking to the residents.
Just curiously, with the properties that have been identified as vacant at this point, what's the percentage in terms of those where the taxes have been paid?
I do not know that answer.
Well, do you have any? Okay,
I would say a large majority of them are actually paid.
They are?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they are not going for that. And that's as far as the point where we're seeing it go to a tax sale purpose. Now, have they not paid and get the warnings and the other, legal notices, there's potential for that. I only see to the point where they're going to tax sale.
Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to get at then is that people have some claim to these properties, then certainly whether they are there or not, for the period of time that you would deem a property to be, not to end up on that list, so to speak. So I guess my next question is, when someone receives a letter, and then I guess when they're asked to register their property as a vacant property, is there any type of penalty that is tied to that? I mean, or is there any kind of stigma or anything that is even tangible that goes along with that?
So if a property is being identified as vacant and they need to register it with the city, let's go first back to your one question there. You said if you received it and you are living at it temporarily or something, first thing to do, call the office. We'll listen to you, hear what you might have to say, what those conditions are, and why it might be showing up as vacant.
Right.
And we'll give suggestions on the items of let's do some of these things to try to deter activity at your property. If you are vacant or need to register as the property, there are fees for those. It's $100 for a residential structure if you're considered non-blighted. It's $500 if you are blighted, and that's an annual fee for those. Commercial is $250, but the longer you're vacant, it can go up to $1,000 for commercial or non-residential ones. If you fail to register the properties, then it can be a municipal infraction fine for failure to register the properties. We don't generally get to the fine point. Most people either let us know what's going on, like the council member gave an example of a property. Yeah, they got a couple letters from us, then they gave us a call, and then we were able to navigate through it. So it was just communication is needed.
And the fee that an individual would pay is just merely the compliance with the city in saying, yes, this is a vacant property.
Well, one of those with creating the fee was to hopefully have people decide, do they want to operate a vacant property in the city of Hagerstown?
Okay.
And, if you're just having a vacant and you're just paying a fee, eventually the goal is that, well, maybe I should just sell this property and move on with it and not keep that in my family. We've had some that have said vacant for decades, and then with this market, it actually has it. I mean, in the last 4 years, the number of vacant structures has decreased. Over 200 properties have been sold due to this, hotter market to get rid of these vacant properties they may have been sitting on.
Yeah, it's definitely the best friend of this whole thing is
Yes.
properties being moved, and obviously people wanting to live in those properties, occupy those properties on a regular basis. Thought it was interesting, Councilmember Alshire pointed out of all the properties that are identified as vacant right now, which you have at 313, on the blighted side, there are 153. His math said that's about 0.6% of all of those in the city. So his question then was, is it possible to contract the services of a firm or an agency who might be able to help deter some of this nefarious activity that would happen within a vacant property, and something beyond, I guess, the capability and maybe just the time that the city has at this point to be able to do some of these things beyond just making sure that somebody can't get in a door or a window. And I think some of his suggestions were maybe to have some sort of electronic surveillance, perhaps, where lights come on, a voice comes on, music, whatever it might be. But my question is, and you talked about this a little bit in the discussion during the meeting, but my question is, you talk about one of the steps with these vacant properties is to have the utilities removed. So would the electricity even be on at a number of these properties if it would get to that point?
I don't know, something we'd have to navigate through to figure out how we would want to be able to have those monitoring systems. I'm not familiar with ones to do surveillance on side of a property.
Yeah.
I have seen the ones that banks utilize for more beefed up security on the doors and the windows on it. I mean, a lot of times when we respond to a building that's being unsecured, it may have been that the door was just left unlocked. We just go out, lock the door, and close the door, and we move on. And
So it can really be that simple
It
sometimes.
is very simple sometimes. So
yeah.
I would, with developing anything or for future discussions, it would be certain thresholds would have to be crossed before you elevated the security to a different level. I believe, I can't speak for the council member, but I would assume that's where they would want to land at too. If it's as simple as just locking a door, we want to take the first approach by just taking something simple.
Yeah, without a doubt. But what I was thinking of, I guess, the extreme example was one that was brought up during the discussion, and I think that would be the Freddy's property, because you had people who were awfully determined to get back in there even after steps were taken to keep them out.
Yes, and it's one of those things that everyone just has time to try to enter into a property that when, no matter if it's a company that's being hired or city staff that are trying to secure it, the time is limited to move on to the next concern that is brought to the residents. So it's something certainly that we have to navigate to try to figure out.
Well, next steps then would be for you to go back, take some of the feedback, the input that you heard from the meeting, and then come back. How much time do you think it'll take before we hear more? Just to let people know, those who are interested in this discussion, when we might get a follow up on everything that we heard today.
I'll be interested in how people listen and watch for this, because these companies that do this professionally for securing properties are probably reaching out to me soon to find out those to see if they could be that contractor with the city.
yeah.
I'll be reaching out, trying to get estimates on what it would generally cost to do something and seeing what type of programs are out there. I would like to come back in the next month or two to the council to present some sort of path forward off of today's discussion.
Yeah, well, a lot of good discussion, I think, with this. Just so many things to consider. I mean, it's one of those where, as you said, it can be as simple as the fact that somebody didn't lock a door, but then it can be as complicated as trying to get a whole host of people out of a property who have seemingly taken it over. So, and lots that falls in between there. So, not an enviable task by any means, but I certainly understand the thought process in coming up with something that could give you a little more of an ability to sort of identify these properties and just give people more of an idea of exactly what all of this means within an ordinance itself. So I certainly understand that and appreciate your time and enlightening us, and look forward to your next discussion and find out where all of this goes, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching. And for now, that is it. That's a wrap. I'll see you next time on Council Wrap.